If the killer did leave some evidence behind, it is yet to be discovered.
These are the words from a documentary that came out 9 years ago, 20 years after JonBenet was killed. Even 20 years later, it is evident how, with so much information at our fingertips, most are clueless, unable to see the woods for the trees, unable to interrogate the information, unable to do simple analysis. Maybe it's not so simple, but to say the killer left no evidence behind in this case beggars belief. At the very least, JonBenet's body was left behind, and there is so much evidence we get just from her autopsy.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head,
I think people lost sight of the fact that there was a little girl that was murdered, and they were more intent on focusing on all of the periphery to that rather than on trying to seek justice for the little girl.
In this same documentary, we see a relatively rare appearance of Lauren Schiller, probably one of the most educated individuals in this case. Educated not just on all the peripheral facts, but also on the primary facts of the crime scene.
For the next year, the grand jury hears testimony, each day leaving the Boulder Justice Center without saying a word. They are faced with deciphering not only complex forensic evidence, but some of the most chilling facts of the story. One of which is the mystery of the pineapple found in JonBenet's stomach after she was killed.
And so here we get his assessment on what the discovery of the pineapple means to him.
That says that JonBenet at some point got up in the middle of the night, or somebody brought her someplace in the house and she had sliced pineapple.
Next, Schiller brings up the embarrassing point that the cops, when confronted with this evidence, were gobsmacked. Pineapple. No one noticed pineapple, and yet it was right there in front of them.
They start looking for that pineapple, and they find a bowl on the dining room table that they first thought was cereal mixed with milk.
And right there you have the central psychology bedeviling this case, seeing everything through one's own frame of reference. A bowl of pineapple is dismissed as a bowl of cereal until the autopsy reveals otherwise, until the actual evidence proves otherwise. Of course, the larger mystery is why one has to find this out from the autopsy and not from any one of the Ramseys themselves.
They didn't know that JonBenet loved her fruit with milk.
Even when the child's mother was confronted on this point, Patsy, who can be incredibly specific, incredibly detail-oriented, suddenly becomes vague.
The presence of undigested stuff in our digestive tract is contrary to what the parents have told us.
That is a nice way of saying there's more to the story than what John or Patsy know, or more to the story than they've revealed. Well, before we get to the rest of this analysis, which is essentially part 3, dealing with some of the insights and observations of FBI agent Ron Walker, if you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please do hit the subscribe button. If you're new to this channel and want to have a look at some of my background, the books I've written, go to truecrimerocketscience.com. All the books in the JonBenet Ramsey case are there in the order that they were written. You can click on them to go to the links to those particular books. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please do hit the thanks button and let's get started.
The parents even denied that she ever had any pineapple, or they denied feeding her pineapple.
Hold on, is that even true? Did Patsy deny giving JonBenet pineapple? What did John say about it? What did Burke say about it?
With respect to JonBenet, was pineapple a favorite meal of hers?
She liked fruit in general.
No particular fruit?
Just most any fruit.
So when Dana Hoffman follows up in this deposition, you can see Patsy sort of shake her head. In other words, her response what Patsy's saying is that no, pineapple wasn't a favorite meal of hers, of JonBenet's. And I seem to remember when Burke was asked the same question, he seemed to not really want to talk about pineapple either.
You describe that to me?
A bowl of He literally doesn't seem to want to enunciate the word pineapple. What made all of this bizarre, of course, was that Patsy and Burke's fingerprints were on these items, and yet both of them couldn't seem to remember much about it. The person in the best position to comment about the bowl of pineapple was Patsy, because she said she was in the kitchen and cleaned up on Christmas Day. And yet it was her position that although the bowl was photographed on the table, she claimed she never saw it. In fact, she would even say that she'd never seen the bowl before. Let's go to this interview with Tom Haney. And you'd said earlier you'd cleaned off the table after breakfast. Patsy, I cleaned off the table. Tom Haney, so that wasn't there. Patsy, No, I've not seen that. Patsy, I did not feed JonBenet pineapple. I don't know how it got in her stomach. And I don't know where this bowl of pineapple came from. I can't recall putting that there. Now, think about that. I don't know where this bowl of pineapple came from. Well, what's that right there on the same table on December 23rd? You notice that white bowl. It's exactly the same white bowl that we see on December 26th. You see now why having too many photographs of Christmas might be problematic. Why? Because the photo reality might contradict the narrative reality or fiction. So do you see on the simple issue of the pineapple, there's paralysis, amnesia, entropy. With Patsy and Burke, it was like taking two horses to water, but you couldn't make them drink. Patsy strenuously denied that she had anything to do with the pineapple. Just have a look at this. I didn't put the bowl there, okay? I did not put the bowl there. Well, perhaps she was telling the truth. Perhaps pineapples made a one-off appearance on Christmas, and that's why no one can remember.
No.
Okay, perhaps an intruder brought a can of pineapple with him.
No.
Here is a pineapple on the kitchen table weeks before the incident. When Lawrence Schiller appeared on Court TV, I think this was in November 2006, Tricia Griffith from Web Sleuths reached out to him via email and specifically asked him why the pineapple aspect wasn't addressed. Her third observation is also interesting. Have a look at this email. Meanwhile, Tricia appears to be on the right track, at least according to Detective Steve Thomas. This is an excerpt from his book, JonBenet, Inside the Ramsey Investigation. This is from page 192. Our experts studied the pineapple in the stomach and reported that it was fresh-cut pineapple, consistent down to the rind with what had been found in the bowl. It was solid proof that it wasn't canned pineapple. And what were the chances that an intruder would have brought in a fresh pineapple to cut up for his victim? Now, what did John say about the pineapple? Well, not much. This is Lou Smith saying, now what have you heard about pineapple, John? Well, we were asked if JonBenet had eaten any pineapple because apparently it was found in her system. I don't know if the police asked us that or we saw it on television or the question came up. I don't remember her eating pineapple. I don't remember pineapple at Fleet's or the White's house. It's sort of been a very logical hors d'oeuvres. I don't remember specifically if it was there. I think part of the question was that she did eat when she got home, and I'm sure she didn't. But then after John is shown a crime scene photo of milk and pineapple, John seems to state the obvious. Lou Smith says, who do you know who would eat pineapple like that? Do you have any idea? And then John says, well, the kids like pineapple, which is a bit of a contradiction to what Patsy had said, where Patsy seemed to think that they liked other fruit and not specifically pineapple. It's also very interesting how John reacted to this question a little late in the questioning and then the next day, possibly after discussing it with his lawyers overnight. In fact, he even admits to doing something like that. First, he wants to know if it is a fact that the substance is pineapple, and this is a sensitive legal question. And what happens? Lou Smith generously serves the answer very helpfully. Thanks so much, Lou. Serves it on a platter. Lou, see, that is the thing. That's the one thing on the counter, you mean. There are multiple speakers, and then Lou says, we don't know. The pineapple is inside her, so we have to figure out how that pineapple got there. There's one way it could get there. She had to eat it at some point. John, are you sure it was pineapple? Lou, yes. John, no question. Lou, no question, no question. So that's always been the big bugaboo. John, is there a timeline based on where it was in the digestive system? John has just asked a significant legal question, which has to do with the timeline and what the pineapple in her digestive tract says about this. It's going to give you an indication of one of the most critical questions in this case, which is JonBenet's time of death. And this is likely an area the grand jury got to hear a lot about in a lot of detail. But as I say, legally speaking, it's a big black hole in the popular mainstream narrative of the Ramsey case. Because the pineapple in JonBenet's digestive tract basically narrows down her time of death to between midnight and 1 a.m., give or take perhaps an hour or so. That's at least according to one expert. But for that to be true, everyone needs to get to bed early, virtually immediately, in order for everything that needs to happen. And of course, in the same way the cops and investigators on scene sort of filtered out the bowl of pineapple as meaningless milk and cereal, when we reverse engineer all of this, it seems the storytellers still can't get past their own filters. Even when they are asked to re-examine the timeline and try to see the pineapple, they still end up seeing cereal.
That says that JonBenet at some point got up in the middle of the night, or somebody brought her someplace in the house and she had sliced pineapple.
Now, on the next day of questioning, John wanted to talk specifically about this, about the pineapple, and he admitted that his lawyer quizzed him about it as well, although John uses a different word. This is John the next day. He says, right, are we ready to talk more about the pineapple later on? Lou, if you would like to, you can talk about it right now. John, all right. Brian, that's his lawyer, chastised me a bit on the way home. He said, like, you were very adamant that she wouldn't be eating pineapple. What do you know for sure? I said, I know we didn't feed her pineapple. I know I didn't feed her pineapple. I know Patsy didn't feed her pineapple because she said she didn't. And while John was dumbfounded and doubtful about the pineapple when first asked, when he came back, he suggested Santa Bill was the intruder and he had broken in and lured JonBenet potentially with a plate of pineapple, which now was her favorite snack and apparently something she couldn't resist. The whole pineapple as a luring device kind of doesn't make sense anymore, because what happens to Lou's electric shocking device? Why do you need both? And so you can see in this respect the Ramseys also offer solutions and suggestions. Some seem to be as outlandish and fanciful as the foreign faction movie quote infested War and Peace of Ransom Notes itself. Even so, John's story in 1997, his theory that Santa Bill was a suspect, while laughable today, made some sense then because the inside job aspect made sense. But why did an inside job need to involve everyone else except a family member? Wasn't a family member or a close friend of a family member in the best position to commit an inside job? Or are we dealing with someone, a close friend of the family, that has somehow slipped under the radar? I mean, think about the pineapple as an analogy for everything else. The pineapple as an analogy for who wrote the note, who made the toggle rope with Patsy's paintbrush, the potential sexual contact. Who could have put it there besides the Santa, besides the housekeeper, besides some constipated guest during the December 23rd Christmas party? And when Shelley imagines JonBenet got up in the middle of the night, he's accepting, like so many before and after him, that the unlikely scenario that hard to put to bed JonBenet was somehow out for the count before everyone else on Christmas of all nights. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, you wanted Christmas to last until the last possible moment. You not only didn't want to go to sleep, you couldn't go to sleep. And if you had a few exciting gifts, you couldn't stop playing with them. We certainly get that impression from Burke. The other thing that is worth noting is that as far as we know, JonBenet's bed wasn't wet that night, which suggests that she didn't get out of bed because she wet the bed, but it also suggests, I think, that she never went to bed to begin with. You might say that John and Patsy both said they put JonBenet to bed, but both John and Patsy didn't seem particularly helpful about the pineapple. Now, one reason this case may be unsolved is because in 10, 20, 30 years, no one has dared to stray outside of the basic narrative that has been in place for 10, 20, 30 years. And most of that narrative is the narrative told by John and Patsy. The pineapple aspect suggests there might be more or less to the original narrative than meets the eye. This is such a basic question, the one you virtually never see discussed. It's this idea of another John and Patsy, perhaps not as close or as affectionate even to each other as some have assumed. And if that's the case, and it is an if that's the case, well then, what if they are also not quite as close to their children that they are both putting, to bed? In other words, did they really put JonBenet to bed that night? Because an alternative scenario is that the Ramseys arrive home from the party and everyone sort of does their own thing. And that wouldn't be weird, by the way. Perhaps one parent pours him or herself a drink. Perhaps another watches TV. Perhaps one child in one room plays with a toy by himself. Another plays with a new Barbie, dresses and undresses her Barbie by herself. There could even be a scenario where there's even another person present, perhaps a playmate, over for a sleepover, and everyone is sort of doing their own thing. And look at this interview Katie Couric does with the Ramseys. She says, for every clue, a new question, like the autopsy finding that JonBenet ate pineapple just hours before she died. None was served at dinner that night, so when did JonBenet eat it? Let's address the mystery of the pineapple. That's been a source of a lot of speculation about what she did when you all got home from that Christmas party. Did she really go straight to bed? Did she eat pineapple? Mr. Ramsey, Couric interrupts saying, did she eat pineapple before she went to bed? John, let's deal with the facts that I know. The facts are that JonBenet was asleep when we brought her home. We put her to bed, and neither Patsy or I fed her anything because she was asleep. Those are the facts. Now, what Pineapplegate touches on, offers a mere glimpse at, is this idea that in one universe JonBenet is asleep and lovingly put to bed by her parents, as they claim, and as was explained to the grand jury. But in another universe she's ambulant and in the kitchen late at night, possibly not alone, eating pineapple. And in this universe, JonBenet is ultimately found in the basement dead. It's devilishly difficult to know what is going on in that second universe if no one tells us. But it's not hard to see that there is a contest going on between fiction and reality, between, to some extent, what is known and what is, between some other version of events and the truth, between pineapple and cereal. Here's another excerpt of an interview between Trujillo and Patsy. Was that earlier? Patsy says, the pride of Miss Jean Brodie. Well, no, it wasn't. Actually, what happened, I did the Miss Jean Brodie. I competed in high school with that and placed nationally with it. She's referring to Miss Jean Brodie. And then I done that, Miss Jean Brodie, for Miss West Virginia and won with that, Miss Jean Brodie. And then when you go to Miss America, you have to go through this business, and basically she used that same drama in that as well, in Miss America. So, and we also know that Pineapple and Cream made an appearance in The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, a book that made such a big impression on Patsy that Patsy used it during her pageants in high school, and Patsy did a scene from the film version in the Miss West Virginia pageant, as you've just heard, and then did something similar during the Miss America contest. And this is an excerpt from Miss Jean Brodie. The speciality of the feast was pineapple cubes with cream, and the speciality of the day was that they were left to themselves. To Sandy, the unfamiliar pineapple had the authentic taste and appearance of happiness, and she focused her small eyes closely on the pale gold cubes before she scooped them up in her spoon, and she thought the sharp taste on her tongue was that of a special happiness, which had nothing to do with eating, and was different from the happiness of play that one enjoyed unawares. Both girls saved the cream to the last, then ate it in spoonfuls. And don't forget, words like attaché and hence appear in that book as well, appear in the Primer Miss Jean Brodie narrative as well. So was pineapple and milk or pineapple and cream really such anathema in the Ramsey home? And did you know a mysterious note also crops up in the Primer of Miss Jean Brodie as well? Have a look at this.
Miss Brodie, do you know what this is?
It would appear to be a piece of blue paper with writing on it in pencil.
It is, in fact, a letter. It was found by Miss Mackenzie in a library book. She glanced at it, but after the first sentence, she dared not actually read it.
In this drama, this is a note that was written by, I think, some of her students, and they were pretending to be her, and when confronted with the note, this is her reaction. And then the other side to this is, do you remember in the actuality of the Ramsey case, Patsy claimed she didn't read the note either. She didn't read the note herself.
Of course, I realize it's a forgery. It is the work of a child. Is this what your girls, your set, has learned under your auspices, Miss Brodie? It's a literary collaboration. 2 separate hands are involved.
2 separate hands are involved, and one thing that was suggested was that because Patsy was ambidextrous, that perhaps she wrote the ransom note with her left hand. That was one idea that was suggested, but what's interesting here is, where did that idea perhaps come from?
You will not use the excuse of that pathetic, that humorous document to blackmail me. Mr. Lowther, you are a witness to this. Miss Mackay has made totally unsupported accusations against my name and yours.
Meanwhile, Steve Thomas suggests in his book that JonBenet's grandmother Nidra said that JonBenet loved pineapple. Have a look at this. Give her a whole can and she'd eat it. We knew she ate pineapple the night she died, and now her grandmother told us how much the child loved it. While she was talking, I weighed some alternatives. That she was given a bedtime snack from the bowl that had Patsy's fingerprints made more sense to me than the possibility of an intruder feeding the child pineapple, keeping her alive long enough for it to reach her digestive tract, then killing her. Now, what else is happening in that universe? What else is happening in this alternative universe? Well, James Kohler on CBS explored that universe, well, I thought crudely and clumsily, and of course got sued for doing so, but at least they pulled on the thread that Pineapplegate proffers. And JonBenet's grandparents also suggest that there was another side to the Ramsey family, at least in terms of the reading material they bought for them. The Paws reportedly bought books on childhood behavior for the Ramseys, suggesting a recognition of potential behavioral issues within the household, which some connect to a generally unstable family environment. Now, I think, to be fair, I think this is something that you see almost in any household. I think often parents have difficulties with children and people buy books in order to deal with that. The question is, to what extent was this true? So where does all of this take us at the end of the day? Well, Pineapplegate suggests something else happened to what we have been fed to believe. For years we've been fed bland, nothing to see here cereal instead of pineapple. What happens when you start seeing all the pineapples in this case as pineapples and not as meaningless cereal? One additional question that arises is, why did whoever was eating the pineapple stop eating it? The glass with tea is empty, but the bowl with pineapple still has quite a lot in it. So what distracted this person? I don't believe JonBenet plucked the pineapple out of the bowl, but I guess it is possible. What happened after that?
The only thing I could think of was, this is now a murder case. It's not a kidnapping. My God, what a mess.
Indeed, and there have been so few have been able to unravel that messiness. In the next episode, we're going to deal with someone you may have never heard of, this guy, Fred Patterson.
A lot of things didn't make sense. If, in fact, she was killed while they were, quote, attempting to kidnap her, why would they leave a ransom note with her body still in the house?
And Fred Patterson will be the next peripheral character we'll deal with in this ongoing series. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.